The watch was wrong. Its cracked crystal caught the office light in a thin white line, but the hands had been set neatly at 12:47. Not close. Exactly. The leather strap was cool against my fingertips, and when I lifted it from the velvet box, I caught the faint smell of Evelyn's hand cream, mixed with the dry paper scent of the attorney's conference room. Somewhere behind me, the air conditioner clicked on with a soft metal rattle. Kyle laughed first. "Well," my son said, leaning back in his chair, "at least Dad got something he can fix." Rachel did not laugh with him. She only nudged the box another inch toward me. "Mom knew you liked keeping old things." I turned the watch over in my palm. Across the table, Martin Hale, the estate attorney, cleared his throat and looked back at the papers in front of him. "As we discussed, Rachel and Kyle are the equal remainder beneficiaries of Evelyn's trust and estate, subject to administration. The current estimated value is approximately $42 million before final expenses, taxes, and adjustments." Kyle's chair creaked again. Rachel folded her hands. Martin glanced at me. "Thomas, your marital property agreement and mutual waiver remain in effect. Your retirement assets, savings, and your Class B interest in Mercer Holdings remain yours. Evelyn's specific personal property bequest to you is the watch. I knew all of that. I had helped build the structure in the first place. At 63, after a career as a certified public accountant and years handling finance for Mercer Holdings, I did not need anyone to explain the difference between being left nothing and being left nothing from Evelyn's separate estate. What bothered me was the way my children were watching me. Not like a widower, like a man waiting to be told his turn was over. Rachel slid a second document across the table. "There's one more thing," she said. "Just transition paperwork. The buyer wants a clean file." A yellow tab marked the signature page. I left it untouched. "Buyer?" I asked. Kyle looked at his sister. Rachel answered before he could. "The portfolio process Mom started. We've been moving it forward. And why does a buyer need my signature if Mom chose the next generation?" Rachel's mouth tightened by a fraction. "Dad, please don't do this here." Martin did not reach for the document. "Thomas still has his Class B protective rights, unless he consents or waives them," he said. "That's simply a fact, under the operating agreement." Rachel looked down at the page. "Which is why this should be easy." I picked it up, not at the signature tab. At the first page, the paper was heavier than ordinary copier stock. My thumb caught on the sharp edge as I turned to the definitions section. Kyle gave a short breath through his nose. "Dad, you retired 18 months ago. You don't have to audit every comma anymore. Then you won't mind if I read them." Nobody answered. Halfway down the second page, I found a reference to Mariner Residential 4. The name had not been used in years. Martin leaned toward the document. "Thomas, was that the entity that became North Sound Residential during the restructuring?" "Yes." "In 2018. Rachel spoke over me. "It was rolled into the current group. The old name isn't important." I looked at her. She tapped the yellow tab. "The signature is on page 11. I closed the document instead. I'll take a copy." For the first time that morning, Rachel's fingers stopped moving. Martin handed me one without comment. The meeting ended 10 minutes later, but the conversation followed me into the elevator. The doors had barely shut before Kyle lowered his voice. "Dad, don't drag this out. If the sale slips, we could lose millions." The elevator hummed beneath my shoes. "What sale?" Kyle stared at the floor numbers above the door. "The portfolio buyer. They've already spent weeks in due diligence." "Weeks?" He looked at Rachel again. Too late. Evelyn had been alive weeks ago. Rachel pressed the lobby button, though it was already lit. Mom started the process. "We kept it moving because that's what she wanted. That's all Kyle means." "Then why wasn't I told?" "Because you stepped away, Dad." Her voice softened. "You said you were done carrying all this. We're trying to honor that." The doors opened. If family stories built on betrayal, buried secrets, and hard-earned revenge are the kind you enjoy, subscribe so you can keep hearing more stories like this. Outside the building, Kyle went toward the garage without saying goodbye. Rachel stayed beside me long enough to touch my sleeve. "Please sign it tonight," she said. "The buyer needs certainty." "Certainty about what?" Her hand dropped. "About the family being on the same page." Then she walked away. I drove home with Evelyn's watch in my coat pocket and the transition acknowledgement on the passenger seat. Every turn made the document slide against the leather. Once, at a red light, I reached across and stopped it with my palm. The words Rachel had used kept bothering me. Same page. At home, I put the watch on the kitchen table beside the document. Evelyn's coffee mug was still in the cabinet above the sink. I had not moved it. Her blue cardigan still hung over the back of the breakfast chair because I had not found a reason good enough to take it upstairs. The refrigerator motor kicked on. I sat down. Page by page. The acknowledgement was ordinary enough to make a person careless. Definitions. Representations. Disclosure language. Buyer reliance. Then, near the middle, one phrase stopped me. Prior related party advances. I read the paragraph twice. By signing, I would acknowledge that certain prior advances and management actions had been disclosed to me, reviewed by me, and not objected to by me. Nothing had been disclosed to me. I turned back to the first page, then forward again. The date range ran through the end of March. My chair scraped the tile as I stood. Evelyn had said something near the end of March, 2 evenings before she went back into the hospital. We had been at this same table. She had pushed a stack of mail toward me and told me she was too tired to deal with it. Then she had held onto one envelope. "If the kids put papers in front of you," she had said, "read every line." I had smiled because that sounded like something I would tell her, not the other way around. Now the joke had gone missing. I picked up the watch again. Evelyn wore quartz watches because she hated winding anything. I had changed the battery for her more times than I could count. The caseback had a shallow notch near the crown, just wide enough for the small watch tool I still kept in the junk drawer. The metal gave with a faint snap. I expected a dead battery. There wasn't one. The battery cradle was empty. My thumb stayed against the case. The hands had not stopped at 12:47 because the watch failed. Someone had removed the battery and placed them there. A thin strip of folded paper sat beneath the empty cradle. I eased it out with tweezers from the drawer and unfolded it on the table. Evelyn's handwriting was smaller than usual, but I knew the slant of the capital M. March 12, 12:47 in the morning. I was asleep, 3:18. For several seconds, the refrigerator was the only thing making noise. March 12. I pulled my phone from my pocket and opened the calendar I had kept during Evelyn's treatment. There it was. An overnight medication adjustment. I had brought her home the afternoon before and slept in the guest room because she wanted the bedroom to herself. She had taken the nighttime medication before 11. I stared at the words again. I was asleep. 3:18 looked like a time until I said it quietly. 3:18. Then I remembered the brass number plate on a steel records box in a private vault in Stamford. Evelyn and I had rented it years earlier for original tax documents, acquisition files, and papers we did not want sitting in the company office. Box 318. I laid her note beside Rachel's acknowledgement. One document wanted me to confirm that I had reviewed transactions through the end of March. The other had been hidden inside a watch with no battery. I picked up my keys. Rachel could wait for my signature. I was going to box 318 first. The vault manager looked at my driver's license, then at the signature card on her screen. "You're still listed as an authorized co-access holder, Mr. Mercer," she said. "I just need your signature here." The pen chained to the counter clicked against the laminate when I picked it up. Behind the frosted glass door, a cart rolled over tile with a soft rattle. The place smelled like old paper, floor wax, and the bitter coffee somebody had left on a warming plate too long. I signed. 5 minutes later, the manager set a gray steel box on a private table and closed the door behind her. 318. The brass tag had a scratch through the last digit. I remembered making that scratch myself years earlier when the box slipped against a file cabinet. Evelyn had laughed and said, "At least nobody could swap ours by mistake." The key turned stiffly. Inside were exactly the sort of things I expected. Original tax elections. Old acquisition binders. 2 deeds we no longer needed but had never bothered to move. A packet from 2018 with the operating agreement for Mercer Holdings. Then I saw the envelope. It was cream-colored, unsealed, and tucked beneath a binder marked Property Restructuring. Evelyn had written my name across the front. Just Thomas. No date. I sat down before opening it. The first page was a copy of a legal notice I recognized by its heading. Revocation of limited financial power of attorney. Rachel Mercer. Effective March 8th. My thumb stopped at the bottom of the page. Evelyn's signature was there, followed by the attorney's certification. A second page showed acknowledgement of receipt by Rachel that same afternoon. I read it again. March 8th. The watch had pointed me to March 12th. 4 days. Beneath the revocation was a short list of transaction reference numbers in Evelyn's handwriting. 3 were circled. 1 had a question mark beside it. At the bottom, squeezed into the margin, she had written 6 words. I didn't approve what this says I approved. That was all. No accusation, no name, no explanation. The paper carried a faint crease where Evelyn had folded it into quarters. One corner had a brown ring from coffee, the sort she used to leave on working papers when she stayed at the dining room table too long. I rubbed the edge between 2 fingers and heard it rasp softly against my skin. Whatever she had found, she had stopped short of naming Rachel. That mattered. I leaned back until the chair touched the wall. For nearly 40 years, Evelyn and I had disagreed about plenty of things. Paint colors, vacation houses, whether Kyle needed another loan. But when she wrote something down for a financial file, she chose her words the way a surveyor drove stakes. If she wasn't sure, she didn't pretend to be. I pulled the 2018 operating agreement from the box. Rachel's authority as chief executive covered ordinary operations: payroll, vendor contracts, maintenance, routine financing below a set threshold. A large related party advance was different. Owner approval was required. So was my written Class B consent. I ran a finger down the section twice. Nothing in the language had changed since I stepped away from daily finance 18 months earlier. I had never signed a March 12th consent. That didn't prove Rachel had done anything improper. A later approval could exist. An amendment could have been made. Paperwork got misfiled in good companies every week. Still, somebody wanted me to sign a document now that said I had already reviewed actions nobody had shown me. Before leaving the vault, I photographed the pages I was entitled to copy and placed everything back exactly where I'd found it. Evelyn's note went into my inside coat pocket. The revocation stayed in the box. In the parking garage, I called Rachel. She answered on the 4th ring. "Dad, did you sign it?" "No." A pause, then her office voice. "What are you waiting for?" On March 12th, what authority was used for the related party action? Nothing came through the phone for a second except a faint burst of typing in the background. Rachel said, "Mom approved it." Directly? Yes. Or, through the power of attorney? Her reply came sharper. "Who is putting this in your head?" I looked through the windshield at the concrete wall 6 feet in front of me. That's not an answer. "Dad, you haven't been involved in daily operations for a year and a half. You're seeing fragments and turning them into something they're not. Then tell me what they are. I have a meeting." "Rachel." Her voice lowered. "Mom approved the transaction. You need to decide whether you trust your own wife." The call ended. I kept the phone against my ear after the line went dead. That was the first time she had made it about trust instead of documents. By the time I reached home, Kyle had left 2 messages. The first said, "Call me." The second said, "Dad, seriously, call me before you screw up the closing." I called him from the kitchen. Kyle answered immediately. "What are you doing?" "Reading." "Of course you are." A cupboard door banged on his end. "Rachel says you're questioning a bridge transaction Mom already approved." "What bridge transaction?" Silence. "Not long." "Long enough," Kyle said. "Temporary support. That's all. The buyer needs a clean closing, and everybody gets paid when the portfolio moves." "Who needed the support?" "Dad, don't start fishing." I asked a simple question. His breathing changed near the receiver. "My project has timing issues. That's not some family scandal. Development deals get tight. You know that." Did Mom tell you she approved it? Rachel handled the paperwork. That's not what I asked. Why are you doing this now? I looked at Evelyn's note on the table. I'm trying to understand what I'm being asked to sign. Kyle muttered something I couldn't make out, then came back louder. It's a temporary bridge. If you freeze everything because you miss sitting behind a desk, people are going to get hurt. He hung up before I could answer. Temporary bridge. I had heard those words from my son before. At 27, it had been a short-term loan to cover a contractor. At 31, a tax payment that had somehow arrived before cash from investors. Each time, he had stood in my office with both palms on the edge of my desk and explained why the problem was temporary. I had solved every one. The acknowledgement was still on the kitchen table. This time I opened it with the operating agreement beside me. The clause I'd marked earlier looked worse with the old contract in view. By signing, I would confirm that prior related party advances had been disclosed to me, reviewed by me, and accepted without objection. They hadn't been disclosed. I had not reviewed them. And whatever happened on March 12th, my required written consent was not in my files. I wrote one sentence in the margin. Disclosed when, by whom, and with what consent. For a minute I listened to the kitchen clock tick above the doorway. Evelyn had bought that clock at a church sale for $12 and refused to replace it because, in her words, it kept better time than anything expensive. The sound had never bothered me before. Now, every click seemed to separate one date from the next. Then I opened my laptop. My Class B rights gave me access to books and records tied to major transactions and protective consent matters. I didn't need Rachel's permission to ask. I did need to be exact. So I was. Ledger entries for March 12th through March 15th. Member consents. Related party disclosures. Bank movement. The electronic signature certificate. Any document purporting to show my consent. I sent the request to the company records address and copied Rachel. Her reply arrived 11 minutes later. I'll review the scope and have someone respond. Not yes. Not no. I closed the email and opened an old monthly summary folder I had kept legally from my final months as finance officer. Most of it was stale, but one preliminary March cash schedule had been forwarded to me automatically before my access settings were fully changed. A line near the bottom caught me. Bridge advance, pending close, $2,800,000. The recipient field showed only an entity code. I stared at the letters. They were familiar. I just couldn't yet remember why. The entity code came back to me before I shut the laptop. BHR. Kyle's resort project had used those initials in its early financing documents, before he started calling the place Blue Harbor in investor presentations. I pulled an old contact sheet from my archived files and found the full name near the bottom, BHR Development, LLC. That did not prove the money went there. An entity code could be reused, shortened, or entered by somebody who liked abbreviations too much. After 30 years around accounting systems, I had learned not to accuse anyone based on 3 letters. So I waited for the records I had requested. The company records mailbox sent a partial package the following morning at 7:12. Rachel was copied. The email contained no explanation beyond one sentence saying the remaining materials were under review. 7 attachments came with it. Ledger detail, bank activity, a due diligence index, an old entity chart, 2 internal summaries, and a compensation schedule. What I had asked for but did not receive was just as easy to see. No electronic signature certificate, no member consent bearing my name, no related party disclosure, explaining why money had gone outside the Mercer Group. I wrote "not produced" beside each missing item. Years of audit work had taught me that an empty space deserved a label too. Otherwise, people had a way of forgetting it was ever empty. I made coffee, left it untouched beside the keyboard, and opened the bank activity first. The bridge advance had funded on March 13th. $2,800,000 moved out of the Mercer system. $2,400,000 went to BHR Development LLC. $250,000 went to RM Advisory LLC. The remaining $150,000 stayed inside Mercer Property Management under lender and legal costs tied to the transaction. I wrote each amount on a yellow pad and added them twice. They matched. Kyle's project had received most of the money. The coffee had gone cool by the time I opened the supporting ledger. Same date, same amounts, same recipient names. Beside BHR development, somebody had typed bridge support pending portfolio close. I read that phrase 3 times. Pending portfolio close. The resort money was not separate from the sale the way Kyle had tried to make it sound. At least on the company's own books, one depended on the other. RM advisory bothered me too, but the package gave me nothing beyond the name and a notation for transaction management. I circled it once and moved on. A name was not an answer. Further down the due diligence index, I found a certificate of amendment for BHR development, effective March 20th. The entity had changed its legal name to Blue Harbor Hospitality LLC. I wrote both names on the pad. BHR Development LLC, March 13th. Blue Harbor Hospitality LLC, March 20th. Nothing about that was improper. Companies change names all the time. Still, dates mattered, and Evelyn had left me a watch set to a date and a minute. I was no longer throwing any date away because it looked ordinary. My phone rang before I finished the next file. Kyle, I answered. Did BHR Development receive $2,400,000 from Mercer on March 13th? No greeting. He did not offer one either. You went through the bank records? Kyle asked. Answer the question. A door closed on his end. His voice dropped. It was bridge support. I already told you that. So yes. I pressed the pen against the yellow pad until the tip left a dark dot. Did your mother tell you directly that she approved it? Dad. Come on. Did she? Kyle let out a breath. Rachel handled it. Mom was sick. That's why Rachel had authority in the first place. That isn't what I asked. I didn't sit beside Mom while she signed every company document. Neither did you by then. The words landed harder because part of them was true. I had stepped away. Evelyn had wanted me to. For years I had been the person who knew which loan reset in June, which roof needed replacing in October, which tenant had an option nobody else remembered. 18 months earlier, I had handed most of that over because my wife asked me to come home before dinner once in a while. But stepping away was not consent. Kyle, I said, did Mom ever tell you, with her own mouth, that she approved that money going to your project? His reply was quieter. Rachel told me it was approved. There it was again. Rachel handled it. Rachel told me, I asked. Was your project in default? Was it close? Another pause. We had a lender deadline. Development deals have lender deadlines. How close? Kyle's chair or desk creaked through the phone. Why does that matter now? The money was temporary. The portfolio closes. Everything gets balanced, and nobody loses anything. Temporary. When Kyle was 27, he had come into my office after a contractor threatened to stop work on his first small development. He needed $80,000 for 10 days. He stood with both hands spread on my desk and promised me it was the last hole he would ever ask me to fill. 4 years later, another temporary problem arrived, with a tax bill and a different explanation. Each time, I fixed the numbers first and asked questions later. My son remembered that. So did Rachel. I'm not signing anything until I know who approved the March transaction, I told him. Kyle's voice hardened. Then don't pretend this is about paperwork. You're putting my company at risk. Your company took $2,400,000 from ours, from Mom's company. The kitchen clock clicked once above me. Mercer Holdings still has more than one owner, I said. Kyle hung up. Less than an hour later, Martin Hale called. His tone was careful enough that I sat straighter before he reached the point. Thomas, Rachel, contacted me about a possible challenge to Evelyn's estate plan, Martin said. I need to ask whether you intend to contest the will or trust. I looked at the watch beside my laptop. No. You're certain? I haven't challenged Evelyn's estate plan. I asked for company records, tied to a transaction that required my consent. Martin was silent for a moment. Rachel described the two issues as connected. They're connected because she connected them. Understood, Martin said. I wanted your position directly rather than assume. After we ended the call, I stayed at the table with the phone in my hand. A lawnmower started somewhere beyond the back fence, rising and falling as it crossed a neighbor's yard. Evelyn used to complain that every man on our street seemed to choose the same hour to cut grass. The thought came and went before I could stop it. Martin had not accused me of anything. He had done exactly what a careful estate attorney should do and asked me directly. That made the call worse, not better. Rachel's version had traveled far enough that a lawyer now needed to separate an inheritance dispute from a records request. Rachel had moved the argument. I was no longer a former finance officer asking why his consent was missing. I was becoming the widower who could not accept what his wife had left the children. That story was easier to repeat at a dinner table than a paragraph from an operating agreement. Another file in the records package carried the buyer's due diligence schedule. I opened it and found the planned closing date, 17 days away. A compensation schedule sat 3 documents below it. Rachel's name appeared beside a transaction bonus tied to closing by the stated deadline. I noticed the line, marked the page, and kept reading. Compensation tied to a sale was not unusual by itself. What mattered more was the clock, now attached to everything. Kyle's lender problem, the bridge advance, the portfolio closing, my signature. At 4:20 that afternoon, Rachel emailed me directly. Dad, the buyer needs the acknowledgement within 48 hours. Your refusal is already creating concern. If the transaction fails because you interfere with a process Mom approved, I will hold you responsible for the resulting losses. I read it once, then again. No question about what I had found. No offer to show me the missing consent. No explanation for why $2,400,000 had gone to Kyle one day after a transaction I had never approved. I saved the email into the same folder as my records request and wrote the time received on the yellow pad. Not because the message proved anything. It did not. But Rachel had just put her deadline in writing, and deadlines told you what people were afraid of losing. Just a deadline. 48 hours. 48 hours sounded different once Rachel had put it in writing. I printed her email and laid it beside the transaction summary. The printer rollers clicked. The page slid out warm against my fingers, and for a few seconds, the kitchen smelled faintly of toner. Then my inbox chimed. Another records package. This one contained the member consent PDF I had requested. I opened it at once. Evelyn's name appeared on the approval page. Beneath it sat an electronic completion stamp showing 12:47 in the morning on March 12th. I checked the time against the note from the watch even though I already knew what I would see. 12:47. The document did not include the full vendor audit trail. No device history, no administrator routing details, just the completed consent package and a certificate page showing when the process ended. Still, the routing looked wrong. When Evelyn and I had run major approvals together, the sequence was simple. Draft to legal, final copy to ownership, protective consent to me when required. Signature package last. The March file jumped from an internal finance preparation line straight to Evelyn's electronic approval, with no Class B consent attached anywhere. That bothered me because Evelyn hated shortcuts in ownership records. She could tolerate a late maintenance report or a vendor invoice coded to the wrong property, but not a missing approval page. Years earlier, when a junior accountant filed one consent behind the wrong tab, she made us reopen 3 binders, just to prove nothing else had been misplaced. She stood beside my desk while I did it, tapping one fingernail against the wood and saying, "If somebody has to explain where the authority came from, the file isn't finished." The sentence came back to me now without invitation. I could almost hear the small tap of her nail between each word. I searched my email archive one more time. Nothing. No request for my signature. No notice asking me to waive it. No memo explaining why it was unnecessary. That did not make Evelyn's signature false. I kept reminding myself of that. A process could be sloppy without being dishonest. Then I opened the supporting email index. Kyle's name appeared 3 times on the night of March 12th. One message went to a finance manager shortly after 10. Another landed close to 11. The third was time-stamped after midnight. The package did not include the full text of every exchange, only subject lines and recipients, but all three referenced BHR funding. I leaned back from the screen. Until then, I had treated Kyle as the person who received the money. Now his name sat inside the transaction night itself. The distinction mattered. I called him. He answered with, "What now? Were you working with Mercer Finance the night of March 12th? Kyle did not answer immediately. A low hum came through the phone, then the click of what sounded like a car door locking. "I was trying to close funding," my son said. "You already know that. Did you see your mother sign the consent?" "Jesus, Dad. Did you?" His voice sharpened. "You keep asking the same question like you're trying to make me say something criminal. I'm trying to make you answer it." Silence stretched long enough for me to hear a truck pass outside my house. Kyle finally said, "No, I didn't see Mom sign it." I put the pen down. "Then, what did Rachel tell you? That authorization was handled." "Those exact words?" "Something like that." "Show me." He gave a bitter laugh. "You're serious." "Very." "Fine. I'll find it." The call ended. 9 minutes later, a screenshot arrived. Kyle's message came first. "Did Mom actually approve this?" Rachel's reply sat beneath it. "Authorization is handled. Dad will sign the cleanup once this is behind us." I read the exchange from top to bottom, then again from bottom to top, as if changing direction might change what the words meant. Cleanup. Not consent. Not approval. Cleanup. I called Kyle back. "Why did you ask if Mom approved it?" "Because finance was moving fast," he said. "I wanted to know we were covered." "And that answer satisfied you?" Kyle exhaled hard. "Rachel was running the company. Mom trusted her. You had stepped back. What was I supposed to do? Call Mom after midnight, while she was sick, and interrogate her about a wire? You could have called her the next day. The money had to move. There it was. Not innocence. Not exactly guilt either. A choice. My son had seen enough to ask one question. When the answer let the money keep moving, he stopped asking. "You received $2,400,000, I said. "That bought you more than one question." Kyle's voice dropped. "Don't talk to me like I'm one of your audit clients. Then don't make me trace your money like one." Neither of us spoke for several seconds. I changed the subject before anger could do the thinking for me. "Why did BHR Development become Blue Harbor Hospitality?" Kyle sounded thrown. "What does that have to do with anything?" I'm asking. The old name sounded like a holding company. The lender meeting on March 20th turned into a branding discussion, and I suggested Blue Harbor. We approved the change after that. "You came up with the name on March 20th? "Yes." "Why?" "Send me the naming email." "Dad, that has nothing to do with Mom's approval." "Then sending it should be easy." Another pause. "Fine." The email arrived while we were still on the phone. Its timestamp was March 20th. Kyle had written to 2 project executives and a lender contact, proposing Blue Harbor Hospitality as the new legal and public name. A later reply confirmed agreement to file the amendment. I saved it with the March 13th bank record that still called the company BHR Development. At that point, the name change meant nothing more than a date I could prove. I filed it anyway. Dates had started this. Dates could wait. The screenshot mattered more. I saved the original image exactly as Kyle sent it and forwarded a copy to an archive folder without changing the file name. Old habits. Back when I handled audits, I had watched good evidence become useless because somebody cropped a message, renamed a file, or copied text into a fresh document, and then swore it meant the same thing. I wasn't building a case against my children at the kitchen table. I was making sure I did not damage the few facts I actually had. I printed Rachel's words and placed them beside the transition acknowledgement she wanted signed. "Dad will sign the cleanup once this is behind us." The acknowledgement asked me to certify that prior related party advances had been disclosed, reviewed, and accepted. They had not. I opened a new letter. First, I sent Mercer Property Management a formal preservation request, covering the electronic signature audit trail, administrator routing logs, document version history, and communications connected to the March transaction. I did not accuse anyone of altering anything. I asked that nothing be deleted, overwritten, or routinely purged while the consent issue was unresolved. Then I prepared a separate packet for First Atlantic Trust Company, Evelyn's revocation of Rachel's limited power of attorney, the operating agreement section requiring my Class B protective consent, the March transaction summary, Kyle's screenshot, Rachel's 48-hour demand. I wrote a short cover letter explaining the only point I could prove at that moment. A material consent dispute existed, and I would not sign a document saying I had reviewed and accepted transactions I had never been shown. No accusation of fraud, no demand that Rachel be removed. Just the record. First Atlantic acknowledged receipt that afternoon. A trust officer wrote that the company would open an independent special review and preserve relevant materials before taking a position on the portfolio transaction. For the first time since the estate meeting, somebody other than me was formally asking the same question. My phone rang less than 20 minutes later. "Rachel, what did you send First Atlantic?" she asked. "No hello. Documents. You turned family paperwork into a corporate investigation. I asked for a review of Mom's decisions, of a transaction that required my consent." Her breathing was barely audible through the line. I looked at her message on the table. "Rachel, if Mom approved the March transaction, why did you tell Kyle I'd sign the cleanup afterward?" Nothing. Not a denial. Not an explanation. Just silence. Rachel stayed silent long enough for the call timer to add 6 more seconds. Then she said, "You'll hear from First Atlantic." The line went dead. I set the phone beside Evelyn's watch and waited for my breathing to settle into something I could ignore. The kitchen had gone quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the second hand on the wall clock. One clock moved. The other did not. By the next afternoon, First Atlantic had already started pulling records. A trust officer named Daniel Price called me first. His voice was measured, the kind that made every sentence sound temporary until the documents caught up. "Mr. Mercer, Mercer Property Management has preserved the electronic signature data you identified," Daniel said. "We've also requested the company legal file concerning the power of attorney. Do you have the audit certificate?" "We do." My chair legs scraped the floor as I sat. Daniel continued, "I want to be careful about what it establishes. The package was initiated from the company's administrative environment associated with Rachel's access. It shows completion at 12:47 in the morning on March 12th. It does not tell us who physically entered the final approval." I looked at the watch. 12:47. Evelyn had removed the battery, placed the hands there, and written the same time under the case. "Send me the certificate," I said. "We can provide it as part of the review packet because your Class B rights are directly implicated." The email arrived while Daniel was still on the phone. I opened the attachment. The time sat in plain type near the bottom. March 12th, 12:47 in the morning. Originating environment, Mercer Property Management Administrative Account. That was all it proved. No fingerprint, no face, no confession hidden in metadata. But Rachel's statement that Mom simply handled the approval herself had become harder to carry. Daniel spoke again. "There's another document you should see." A second attachment appeared. It was not Evelyn's copy from Box 318. This one came from the company's legal records. The notice revoking Rachel's limited power of attorney was dated March 8th, and a receipt beneath it showed Rachel's acknowledgement that afternoon. Her electronic acknowledgement, her name, her date. I pressed my thumb against the edge of the table. The copy in the vault had told me Evelyn revoked the authority. This one told me Rachel could not later say she never knew. "Does that make the March transaction invalid by itself?" I asked. "No," Daniel said. "Not by itself. There may be another authority document. There may be later ratification. That's why the review stays open." Good answer, the careful answer. I had spent too many years around financial disputes to trust anybody who said one document settled everything. An outside accountant retained by First Atlantic called me an hour later. Her name was Susan Bell, and she asked me to walk her through the exact paragraph I had marked in Rachel's transition acknowledgement. I read it aloud. Susan let me finish before she said, "Your reading is fair. The buyer could treat this as a representation that the Class B holder reviewed the earlier related party activity, received disclosure, and did not object. Even though I never approved the original advance? Especially because you didn't approve it then. From a due diligence standpoint, your signature could make the historical consent problem look resolved. Counsel would have to determine the legal effect. I leaned back. So Rachel isn't asking for a ceremonial signature. No, she's asking me to repair the file. Susan paused. I wouldn't use that word in a formal memo yet. Cleanup. Rachel's word. I looked at Kyle's screenshot on the table. Dad will sign the cleanup once this is behind us. The phrase no longer sounded careless. It sounded precise. I thanked Susan and ended the call. For the first time, I understood why Rachel had pushed the acknowledgement across the table before I had even left the estate conference. She did not need my blessing as her father. She needed the Class B holder to turn a missing consent into a later acceptance. That changed what I did next. I did not call Rachel. I did not call Kyle. Instead, I wrote to First Atlantic. The letter was short. I stated that Evelyn's limited power of attorney had been revoked before the March transaction. I noted that company records showed Rachel had acknowledged that revocation. I identified the missing Class B consent, the related party transfer to Kyle's project, and the electronic signature completion time that matched the time Evelyn had deliberately left for me inside her watch. I stopped there. No claim that Rachel had forged Evelyn's signature. No claim that Kyle had planned anything. Only facts I could put beside documents. Then I asked First Atlantic not to approve the portfolio sale, while the historical consent issue remained unresolved. I read the letter twice before sending it. At 5:30 that evening, Daniel called back. We've informed the buyer that First Atlantic will not approve closing while the special review is pending, he said. I stood without meaning to. So the closing is off? Paused. Not terminated? The difference mattered. But for a moment I let my hand rest against the back of the chair. Paused was the first thing that had happened since Evelyn died that Rachel had not arranged in advance. On the table, the unsigned acknowledgement lay beneath Rachel's 48-hour demand. I slid the demand aside and put the audit certificate in its place. For days, she had been telling me the only problem was my refusal to cooperate. Now an independent trustee had found enough unanswered questions to stop moving on her schedule. Daniel continued. The operating agreement gives the trust controlling Class A voting rights during administration. With a material consent dispute open, we're not authorizing the transaction today. What did the buyer say? They're holding their closing process until the seller representation issue is resolved. A sound escaped me that was almost a laugh, though nothing about the situation was funny. Thank you for telling me. Mr. Mercer, understand something. This is not a finding of misconduct. I understand. Rachel can still present evidence that Evelyn ratified the transaction after the revocation. If that evidence is reliable, the analysis changes. There it was. A door I had managed to close with one hand still had another lock I had not seen. After we hung up, Kyle called within minutes. What did you do? He demanded. I asked First Atlantic to review the consent problem. You killed the closing. Daniel said it was paused. My lender doesn't care what word Daniel uses. Kyle's voice carried the hollow echo of a large room. That sale was part of the capital plan. If it slips, Blue Harbor gets squeezed. Then you should have asked more questions before taking $2,400,000. Don't do that. Do what? Talk like this was theft. Mom approved it. You told me you never heard that from her. Rachel did. And Rachel knew the power of attorney had been revoked. Silence. Kyle came back quieter. What? That caught me. You didn't know? I knew Mom changed some paperwork. I didn't know the date. His answer did not clear him, but it told me Rachel had not necessarily shared the whole file with her brother either. Before I could ask another question, Kyle said, If this project goes down because you want to prove a point, don't expect me to forget it. I don't need you to forget anything. He hung up. Rachel did not call. For nearly 2 hours, nothing came from her. I made myself eat half a sandwich over the sink. The bread had gone dry at the edges. Evelyn's watch sat on the counter where I could see the cracked crystal every time I turned. First Atlantic had paused the sale. Rachel's deadline had failed. The signature page was still blank. It should have felt like an answer. It did not. At 8:16, my phone lit up with a message from Rachel. "We can settle this tomorrow, privately." I read it once. Then I looked at the audit certificate beside the watch. 12:47 matched. The revocation was real. Rachel knew about it. And still, Daniel's warning stayed with me. She could have another document, another authority, another version of what Evelyn wanted. I set the phone down without replying. For the first time since I found the note inside the watch, I had stopped Rachel's timetable. I had not stopped Rachel. Rachel chose the small conference room at Mercer Property Management instead of her office. That told me something before she said a word. Her office had photographs, awards, and the walnut desk Evelyn bought when Rachel became chief executive. The conference room had a glass table, 6 gray chairs, and a vent that clicked every few minutes above my head. Neutral ground, or close enough to pretend. A leather folder waited in front of the empty chair across from Rachel. She tapped it once. "Before you decide the whole family is lying to you, read this." I sat but left the folder closed. "Who drafted it?" "Counsel reviewed it. The company can fund part of the transaction, and I can fund the rest personally. Any final payment would still need the proper approvals." Her answer was too careful to be improvised. "What transaction?" Rachel folded her hands. "A clean exit." That phrase sounded better than settlement and less expensive than surrender. I opened the folder. The first pages laid out a proposed purchase of my Class B interest, at a value tied to an independent appraisal. There was also a consulting payment for limited transition work. Nothing on the face of it looked absurd. If the approvals came through, I would receive fair value. The buyer could restart its closing process, and my involvement with Mercer Holdings would end. I had reviewed enough buyouts during my career to know when a number was designed to insult someone. This one was not. Rachel had not pushed a napkin across the table with a payoff scribbled on it. She had built an offer a cautious lawyer could defend, with company money limited to what could be approved and the balance coming from her. That made it harder to dismiss. A bad offer would have told me what she thought of me. A reasonable one told me how badly she wanted the signature. Then came the release. "You want me out of the company?" I said. Rachel shook her head. "I want you out of this fight." "There's a difference." "Is there?" "Dad, you've been retired for a year and a half. Mom wanted you to have a life that wasn't built around ledgers and lender calls. You said the same thing yourself." A pipe thumped somewhere inside the wall. Rachel leaned back. "People are worried about you." "Which people?" "Does it matter?" "If you're using them in the sentence, yes." Her mouth tightened. "Kyle. Martin. Some people at the company. They see you digging through old files at all hours. Calling trustees. Freezing a sale Mom worked on. You buried your wife less than 2 weeks ago. Maybe you shouldn't have to carry all of this alone." There it was without the word she was careful not to use. Old. Unsteady. A widower who should be protected from his own judgment. She did not have to call me confused if she could get 3 other people to ask whether I was sleeping. She did not have to say I had lost my grip if she could remind everyone I had retired and buried my wife in the same sentence. I ran my thumb along the edge of the release. "Did you tell them I was challenging the will?" "I told Martin there was a risk the estate plan might become part of the dispute." "That's not what he asked me." Rachel looked toward the glass wall, then back. "You know how these things spread, especially when somebody starts them." Her chair gave a small squeak as she shifted. "This isn't helping," she said. "Every day the sale sits, the buyer loses patience. Kyle's lender is already asking questions. Employees are hearing rumors. Mom spent 30 years building something that could survive her. And this paper protects that? It protects what's left from becoming a family war." I turned another page. Rachel's voice softened. She used to say you never knew when to let the kids handle things. My fingers stopped. "Evelyn said that?" "More than once." The vent clicked above us. Rachel did not rush to fill the silence. She knew better. There was no document I could request for a sentence spoken between a wife and daughter. No timestamp. No audit certificate. Evelyn could have said it. She had told me to step back from daily finance because I came home carrying everyone else's problems. She had pushed me toward retirement before I admitted I wanted it. Maybe Rachel had taken one complaint and sharpened it. Maybe she had not. Either way, Evelyn was not there to correct either of us. Rachel slid a pen across the glass. "Take the buyout," she said. "Let First Atlantic finish its administration. Let the buyer close. Kyle fixes his financing. You walk away with your own money, and no one spends the next year paying lawyers to prove who remembered March correctly." The pen stopped beside my hand. For a few seconds, the offer looked almost reasonable. Blue Harbor stayed alive. The portfolio sale moved again. Employees stopped whispering. First Atlantic could go back to administering the trust. Instead of examining a transaction, Evelyn might have approved another way. And I could go home. That part had weight. I pictured the kitchen without stacks of records. Evelyn's mug back in the cabinet instead of beside an audit certificate. Sleep without waking at 3 in the morning and seeing 12:47 on a cracked watch. I picked up the pen. Rachel's shoulders lowered by half an inch. "Thank you," she said. I did not sign. The release was 6 pages long. I started at the first sentence and read down slowly. Halfway through page 4, I found it. The agreement required me to acknowledge and ratify actions taken under prior authority in connection with the March Bridge transaction and related company decisions. Prior authority. I read the clause again. Rachel's voice came from across the table. It's standard release language. Then why does it need ratification? Because your protective consent was never separately documented. This cleans that up. She had used the word herself this time. I set the pen down. I can't ratify something I haven't verified. Rachel's face did not change much, but the softness left her voice. You verified enough to stop a $42 million sale. I verified enough to ask why my consent was missing. And now you're costing everyone money while you search for an answer Mom already gave. I closed the folder. Show me the answer. Rachel stared at me for a moment, then reached for a second folder beside her chair. That one was thinner. You keep treating the March 8th revocation like it ended everything, she said. It didn't. She removed a photocopy and placed it on the table with 2 fingers. The heading read, Affidavit of Ratification, dated March 14th. My eyes moved lower. Evelyn Mercer. The document stated that Evelyn ratified Rachel's authority concerning the bridge transaction and approved the related actions taken on her behalf. I did not touch it. Where did this come from? Mom's records. Which records? Company legal files. It was located after First Atlantic opened the review. Why wasn't it in the first production? Rachel gave a tired little shrug. Because not every file is where you would have put it 20 years ago. I read the date again. March 14th. 2 days after the watch had been set to 12:47. 6 days after Evelyn revoked Rachel's power of attorney. If the affidavit was real, Evelyn could have revoked authority, discovered a paperwork problem, and then ratified the transaction afterward. The sequence would be unusual, but unusual was not impossible. My evidence did not disappear. Its meaning changed. Has First Atlantic seen this? I asked. They will have it today. And the original? Counsel is dealing with that. Rachel pulled the photocopy back toward herself before I could lift it. You wanted a reason to stop treating me like I stole something from my own mother, she said. There it is. I stood. A photocopy isn't a reason. Neither is a broken watch. That landed because she did not know what the watch contained. At least, I had never told her. I left the building with the settlement folder still unsigned and Rachel's affidavit date written on the back of my own legal pad. March 14th. The elevator doors closed behind me with a soft thud. Outside, I sat in my car without starting it and looked at Evelyn's note on my phone. March 12. 12:47 in the morning. I was asleep. 3:18. If Evelyn had warned me about March 12th, then ratified Rachel 2 days later, what exactly had she been trying to tell me? Evelyn's sentence followed me home from the parking lot. If the kids put papers in front of you, read every line. I had heard her say it at our kitchen table, tired enough that she had left half her tea untouched. At the time, I thought she was reminding me of a habit I already had. Now Rachel had used the word cleanup herself, and the sentence no longer sounded casual. The settlement folder stayed closed on the passenger seat all the way home. Kyle called before I reached the driveway. Rachel says you walked out, he said. I walked out without signing. Same thing right now. I parked but left the engine running. I need you to tell me what happened before the bridge money moved. Start before you asked Rachel whether Mom approved it. We've done this. No, you've answered pieces. I want the sequence. A turn signal clicked somewhere on his end. Kyle muttered something, then said, Fine. Blue Harbor was tight. How tight? The lender had us against a funding deadline. If we missed it, they could stop advances and start default remedies. That was more than he had admitted before. Were you in default already? Not formally. We were close enough that it didn't matter much. Payroll was coming. Contractors were waiting. If the lender froze us, people were going home. So you asked Rachel for money. I asked whether Mercer could bridge us until the portfolio sale. She said she would see what was possible. The engine fan blew warm air against my hands. When did you ask whether Mom approved it? Kyle was quiet. When finance told me the transfer was moving. Why did that make you ask? Because it was a lot of money, Dad. And Rachel said authorization was handled. Yes. Then the money arrived. Yes. And you never asked Mom. His answer came softer. No. I shut off the engine. The silence after it stopped was complete. Why not? Kyle let out a tired breath. Because I needed the money to stay where it was. Is that what you wanted me to say? I rubbed my thumb over the steering wheel seam. I wanted the truth. There were employees on that project who had nothing to do with our family. There were contractors who'd already bought materials. I wasn't sitting there thinking about legal theories. I was trying to keep the lender from shutting the door. You had time to ask Rachel one question. And she answered it. She answered it in a way that let you stop asking. Nothing came back. I looked at the dark garage beyond the windshield. For years, I had treated Kyle's emergencies as if the urgency itself proved the solution. Pay the contractor, cover the tax bill, call the lender, fix first, sort out the lesson later. Later had finally arrived. If that bridge has to be repaid, I said, I'm not going to argue that Rachel should carry it alone. Kyle's voice changed. What does that mean? It means $2,400,000 went to your project. If the review says it has to come back, your project doesn't get a family exemption. She's the one who handled the authorization. And you're the one who took the money after you knew enough to ask whether Mom approved it, so now I'm guilty because I trusted my sister? No. You're responsible for the part you chose. The words sat between us. Kyle did not hang up this time. Instead, he said, You keep talking like Rachel had nothing at stake except helping me. She needed that sale too. What are you talking about? Her closing bonus. I straightened in the seat. What closing bonus? It's in her compensation package. If the portfolio closed by the deadline, she got paid. I don't know the exact number. I did. Or at least I knew where to look. The compensation schedule from the buyer packet was still in the folder I had marked 2 days earlier. I went inside, opened the file, and found Rachel's name halfway down the page. Transaction completion incentive. $600,000. Payable if the portfolio sale closed by the stated deadline and final conditions were satisfied. There was nothing improper about a bonus tied to a sale. Executives received them. I had approved incentive plans myself years ago, but Rachel had spent days talking as if every step she took was about Mom's wishes, Kyle's employees, and protecting the estate from me. $600,000 gave her one more reason to want the clock moving. I went back through the pages around it. The incentive had been approved months earlier, before Evelyn's final decline, and nothing on the schedule suggested the bonus itself had been hidden. That mattered. I did not want to turn an ordinary compensation plan into something sinister just because I no longer trusted the person receiving it. But ordinary facts could still sit beside extraordinary pressure. Rachel had 48 hours on one email, a closing deadline on another, and 600,000 reasons not to let either one slip. I forwarded the schedule to Daniel Price with a short note asking that it be included in the special review. His reply came less than an hour later, already identified. We are also reviewing the RM advisory payment. I called him. What did you find on RM advisory? Daniel answered carefully. The entity records identify Rachel as its controlling member. The $250,000 payment was booked as transaction management compensation connected to the bridge. Susan Bell is reviewing whether it was properly authorized and disclosed. I pulled the yellow pad toward me. $2,400,000 to Kyle. $250,000 to Rachel's entity. $600,000 more if the sale closed on time. Does the fee prove anything by itself? I asked. No, Daniel said. Related party compensation can be lawful. The issue is whether it was disclosed and approved under the governing documents. Good. Keep it that way. Meaning? Review what happened. Don't turn the fact that she's my daughter into evidence, and don't turn it into an excuse either. Daniel paused. Understood. After the call, Kyle showed up at my house. The doorbell sounded once, then twice. When I opened the door, he was still wearing the same navy quarter zip he used at lender meetings. His collar had folded under on one side. He noticed the papers spread across the kitchen table and stopped just inside. You told First Atlantic about my project, he said. Yes. Rachel's fee too? Yes. Kyle stared at me. So there's no difference anymore. There is a difference. It just doesn't erase your part. He walked to the table but did not sit. If I cooperate, what happens? I don't decide that. Come on, Dad. First Atlantic listens to you because you're the one making the complaint. They listen because I gave them documents. Kyle's jaw worked once. I continued. If you want consideration later, give them your records, preserve your messages, tell them what you knew and when you knew it. Don't ask me to hide your transfer while they examine Rachel's fee. You'd really let Blue Harbor go under? I looked at him across Evelyn's kitchen table. I won't make it go under, and I won't lie to keep it standing. His eyes dropped to the unsigned settlement folder. Mom would hate this. Maybe. That answer bothered him more than an argument would have. Kyle left without slamming the door. His coffee mug from the last time he had been there was still in the drying rack. I picked it up, then set it back down. For most of his life, consequences had arrived with me standing nearby holding a solution. He had learned to expect that. I had taught him to. The thought did not make the transfer cleaner, but it made one part of the mess mine to recognize. Later that evening, Daniel sent a cooperation form for Kyle's counsel to review, along with an update from First Atlantic. Kyle had agreed to preserve his project records and communications, while settlement options remained open. The update contained one more paragraph. Rachel's March 14th affidavit had been submitted to the buyer review team. On its face, it carried Evelyn's signature, formal ratification language, and the appearance of a properly executed document. First, Atlantic had not accepted it as conclusive, but the buyer considered it serious enough to request a full authenticity and authority review before deciding whether the closing could resume. I read the paragraph twice. Rachel had a fee. She had a bonus. Kyle had looked away when the money arrived. None of that answered the question, sitting underneath everything else. If Evelyn truly signed that affidavit on March 14th, Rachel might still have the one document strong enough to change the meaning of all the others. The affidavit arrived in my inbox at 8:36 the next morning. Not a summary this time. The full copy. I heard the little chime from my laptop while the coffee maker was still dripping behind me, and by the time I sat down, the smell of burnt grounds had filled the kitchen. 4 pages opened on the screen. Evelyn's name at the top, her signature at the bottom. It looked like hers. That was the first problem. The long upward stroke on the E was there. So was the slight break before the final N in Mercer, a habit she had carried for years. If someone had asked me across a dinner table whether the signature belonged to my wife, I would have said yes before they finished the question. But I was not a handwriting expert. I knew that too. The affidavit said that on March 14th, Evelyn had reviewed the bridge transaction, ratified Rachel's authority, and approved the related transfer to Blue Harbor Hospitality LLC. It referred to the advance as necessary interim support and described the transaction as consistent with her wishes for the family companies. The language sounded polished, finished. None of it sounded like the woman who had hidden a note under a watch battery. I read the sentence once. Then I read it again. A note from First Atlantic sat above the attachment, Daniel Price said the buyer's counsel considered the document substantial enough that, if its authenticity held and the remaining Class B issue could be cured, the closing might resume. Might. That single word was enough. 2 days earlier I had managed to stop the sale. Now a 4-page document could turn me from the man, asking a necessary question, into the man costing the family millions over something Evelyn had already approved. My phone rang. Rachel. I let it ring twice before answering. "Did you get it?" she asked. I did. "Then withdraw the dispute." Her certainty scraped more than if she had raised her voice. "First Atlantic hasn't finished reviewing it. They have Mom's signature. They have a copy with her signature." Rachel let out a breath. "Dad, how many different ways does she have to tell you the same thing before you'll listen?" I looked at the cracked watch near my elbow. She told me something else, too. "What does that mean?" "It means the review stays open." Rachel's voice went flat. "You wanted proof Mom knew. You have proof Mom knew." "No. I have a document that says she knew. That's what documents do." Then she hung up. An hour later, Kyle called. He sounded less angry than he had the day before, which made the conversation harder. "Maybe Rachel was telling the truth about the approval," he said. "Maybe. You actually said maybe. I've been saying maybe since this started." "No, Dad. You've been acting like the answer had to be fraud." I closed the affidavit on the screen. "I have not accused Rachel of fraud. You froze the sale." "Because my consent was missing." Kyle went quiet. Then he said, "If Mom signed that on the 14th, Rachel's message to me could mean exactly what she said it meant. Authorization was handled. You were supposed to clean up the Class B paperwork later. That possibility had already occurred to me. Hearing it from him did not make it smaller." "I know." "Then what are you still looking for?" I glanced at the watch. "Something that tells me which version is true." First Atlantic's outside counsel called that afternoon. Susan Bell joined the call. Counsel spoke first. "Thomas, I want to be clear. We have no basis right now to declare the affidavit false." "I understand," Susan added. "And visual comparison of the signature won't get us there. It resembles Evelyn's known signature, but nobody on this call is qualified to authenticate handwriting from an image. So where does that leave the review? With chronology, source records, execution history, and the original if it can be located," counsel said. "Suspicion isn't enough. Could the buyer close if they accept this?" "Not today," counsel said. "But if the affidavit holds up and your Class B issue is cured, their position may change." Susan's voice came next. "Which means the dates matter more now than the appearance of the signature." I wrote that sentence down. Dates matter more. After the call, the kitchen felt smaller. No hidden witness was going to knock on my door. No camera was waiting somewhere with Rachel's face on it. The papers I had were the papers I had. I moved Evelyn's old placemats aside and spread the records across the table. Documents in rows, pencil marks in margins. One legal pad at the center. I did not need to prove what Rachel intended. Not yet. I needed to find out whether the story on the paper could exist in the order the paper claimed. I spread everything across the table in date order. March 8th. Revocation. March 12th. Electronic consent at 12:47. March 13th. $2,800,000 moved. March 14th. Affidavit. I put the March 13th bank record beside it. BHR Development LLC. Then my eyes moved back to the affidavit. Blue Harbor Hospitality LLC. I stopped. The name sat in the middle of the second page. Not BHR Development. Blue Harbor Hospitality. My chair rolled backward an inch when I pushed away from the table. Kyle had told me he came up with that name during a lender meeting on March 20th. He had sent me the naming email himself. The Secretary of State filing in the due diligence package showed the amendment effective the same day. I pulled both records open. Kyle's email was time-stamped March 20th. "We need a cleaner legal and market name going forward. I propose Blue Harbor Hospitality LLC." Replies followed that afternoon. "Approved. Works for lender materials. Let's file it." Then the state record. Effective March 20th. I returned to the affidavit. Dated March 14th. The document claimed Evelyn had ratified a transaction involving an entity under a legal name that, according to the records in front of me, had not yet been proposed. I leaned closer until the paper nearly touched my glasses, checking for some qualifying phrase I had missed. Formerly known as proposed name, trade name, nothing, just Blue Harbor Hospitality, LLC, written as if that had been the company's name all along. I did not celebrate. A later clerical update could explain it. Someone might have recreated the affidavit after the name change, while preserving the original date. There could be an earlier branding discussion Kyle had forgotten. A lawyer could have substituted the current name into an old form for convenience. One contradiction was not a verdict, but it was enough to ask another question. I called Kyle. What day did you first use Blue Harbor Hospitality? Why? Answer me. He sighed. March 20th. The lender meeting. Was the name discussed before that? Not that I remember. Search your email. Keys clicked on his end. For nearly a minute, he said nothing. Then, the first result is my March 20th message. Anything earlier? No. Meeting notes? I can send them. Do it. The notes arrived 3 minutes later. The agenda used BHR development throughout. Near the bottom, under branding and lender presentation, somebody had typed new name, proposed by Kyle Mercer. Blue Harbor Hospitality. I sent the affidavit, Kyle's email, the meeting notes, and the state filing to Daniel and Susan. My message contained one question. How can a document executed on March 14th identify an entity by a name first proposed and adopted on March 20th? Daniel called before I could make fresh coffee. We're expanding the authenticity review, he said. To what? Corporate document version history, upload dates, creation metadata available through the company's system, and the source of the affidavit copy Rachel produced. We're also preserving any prior versions. Does the name issue stop the buyer from relying on it? For now, yes. We can't treat it as clean, contemporaneous ratification until the chronology is explained. Could it still be an innocent correction? Yes, Daniel said. That's one possibility. We need the source history before we say more. That answer kept my feet on the floor. The buyer's hold remained in place, not the soft hold from before. Daniel said buyer's counsel wanted the authenticity question resolved before any further closing work. That evening, Rachel called. Her voice was low. You're burning down what Mom built. I stood beside the kitchen table with the affidavit open in front of me. No, Rachel. Do you have any idea what this delay is costing? I have one question. She said nothing. I looked at the date on the first page and the name on the second. How did a March 14th affidavit know a name Kyle invented on March 20th? The line stayed open. Rachel said nothing. Then the call ended. 23 minutes later, Daniel Price called. We have the first result from the document system, he said. The affidavit file does not appear in Mercer Property Management's records on March 14th. I stood at the kitchen counter with one hand against the edge. When does it appear? March 22nd. The first recorded version in the corporate system was uploaded under Rachel's administrative user space. The refrigerator motor clicked off behind me. Daniel continued before I could answer. That does not establish who created the underlying document, when any paper original may have been signed, or whether someone later recreated a prior document. I don't want you treating an upload date as a criminal finding. I'm not. But it means we cannot rely on this copy as contemporaneous proof of March 14th ratification. I looked at Evelyn's watch. March 12th. The date on the affidavit. March 14th. The new company name. March 20th. The file itself. March 22nd. For weeks, I had been looking at each piece separately, because each piece had arrived separately. That night, I stopped doing that. I cleared the kitchen table and laid out one page for every date that mattered. March 8th. Evelyn revoked Rachel's limited power of attorney, and Rachel acknowledged receiving the revocation. March 12th. The electronic consent package was routed through Rachel's administrative environment and completed at 12:47 in the morning. My Class B consent was missing. March 13th. $2,800,000 moved. $2,400,000 went to Kyle's project. $250,000 went to RM Advisory. The rest stayed for transaction costs. March 14th. The affidavit claimed Evelyn ratified Rachel's authority and referred to Blue Harbor Hospitality by name. March 20th. Kyle proposed Blue Harbor Hospitality for the first time, according to his email and meeting notes. The legal name change followed. March 22nd. The affidavit file first appeared in the company's document system under Rachel's administrative space. Then came the paper Rachel put in front of me after Evelyn died, asking me to ratify the same prior actions. I did not need another theory. I needed the dates to sit in one room with the people who kept explaining them one at a time. First Atlantic scheduled the special review for 2 days later. The meeting took place in a conference room at the trust company's Stamford office. Rachel arrived before me. She sat with a yellow legal pad closed in front of her and a glass of water she never touched. Kyle came in next, shoulders stiff beneath a dark jacket. Daniel Price sat near the head of the table with First Atlantic's counsel. Susan Bell had a folder open beside her. Buyer counsel joined by video on a wall screen. Nobody treated it like a courtroom. That made it worse. No raised voices. No dramatic objections. Just paper, dates, and people who could stop a $42 million transaction by refusing to trust what they were being shown. Daniel started. Thomas, you raised the material consent dispute. Walk us through the chronology you believe needs resolution. Rachel leaned back. We're really going to let Dad present an audit of his own family? Daniel looked at her. We're going to let a Class B owner explain the records he identified. I placed the March 8th revocation on the table. Rachel acknowledged this 4 days before the bridge transaction. Rachel said, and Mom later ratified the transaction. Maybe, I said. Her eyebrows lifted. I put the e-sign certificate beside the revocation. The March 12th approval was routed through the company administrative environment associated with your access. That does not prove you signed for Mom. It does prove the file did not move the way you first described it to me. Rachel's lawyer shifted in his chair, but Rachel answered herself. Administrative routing is not execution. I agree. That stopped her for half a second. I turned to Daniel, and I never gave the Class B consent required for the related party advance. Susan nodded. Our review confirms no separate Class B consent has been located. Next came the money. I slid the bank summary forward. $2,400,000 went to BHR Development. Kyle rubbed both hands together under the table. I looked at him. Did Mom ever tell you directly that she approved that transfer? Kyle stared at the paper. No. Rachel turned toward him. Kyle. He did not look at her. I asked you if she approved it, he said. You told me authorization was handled. Buyer counsel spoke through the screen. Is that communication preserved? Susan answered. Yes, Kyle swallowed, and I kept the money after that. I should have asked again. I didn't. No one rushed to rescue him from the sentence. I moved to the next page. $250,000 went to RM Advisory, which the review identifies as controlled by Rachel. Rachel's voice sharpened. For actual transaction work, Susan said, that payment is still under review for authorization and disclosure. And the $600,000 closing bonus? I asked. Rachel looked at me. An approved compensation plan is not misconduct. I didn't say it was. Silence again. That was the point. I did not need every item to be improper by itself. I needed everyone at the table to see why Rachel had reasons to keep the deal moving and reasons to want old consent problems cured. Then I placed the affidavit in the center. Rachel straightened. Here is the document you said settled everything, I told her. It does. I put Kyle's March 20th naming email beside it. Your affidavit is dated March 14th. It calls the recipient Blue Harbor Hospitality, LLC. Rachel looked down. Kyle's email proposes that name on March 20th. Her lawyer leaned closer to the page. I added the state filing. The legal change also became effective March 20th. Rachel finally spoke. Then, legal recreated the document with the current entity name for the file. That's clerical. That is possible. She looked almost relieved. I placed the document system report beside the affidavit. The company system first records this file on March 22nd under your administrative user space. Rachel's fingers closed around her pen. I sent documents to legal all the time. I know. Then what exactly are you accusing me of? Nothing beyond what these records establish. I pulled Rachel's transition acknowledgement from my folder. This was given to me after Mom died. It asks me to ratify the March actions you say Mom had already ratified. Nobody spoke. I set it beside the affidavit. One document says the problem was cured on March 14th. The other asks me to cure it again after her death. Buyer counsel muted himself briefly, then came back. Our client no longer has a reliable chain of seller authorization it can accept for the current transaction. Rachel turned toward the screen. You're walking away because of a file naming issue? Because of unresolved authorization, related party transfers, inconsistent document history, and a disputed member consent, buyer counsel said. Our client is terminating the current deal. The words were quiet. Kyle lowered his head. Rachel did not move. Daniel closed his folder. First Atlantic will exercise the voting rights attached to the trust's Class A interest. Pending completion of the civil recovery review, Rachel's authority over transaction and related party matters is suspended. The trust will not approve a replacement sale process under current management. Rachel looked at Daniel as if he had spoken in another language. What about my position? That will be addressed through the member and board process. Her pen slipped from her fingers and struck the glass tabletop. Kyle's phone vibrated. He checked the screen, then stood halfway before sitting again. My lender, he said. Daniel nodded once. They were notified that expected sale capital is no longer available. Kyle stared at me. They're starting remedies. I said nothing. Across the table, Rachel finally picked up her pen. Her voice was low when she spoke. You got what you wanted. I did not answer. She pushed the terminated buyer letter toward me with 2 fingers. You just cost this family millions. Still, I said nothing. Kyle looked from the letter to me, the same way he had looked at me every time a lender deadline, tax bill, or failed project had landed on his desk, waiting. Rachel saw it too. For the first time all morning, her composure cracked at the edges. Well? She asked. The question was almost familiar. What are you going to do about it, Dad? Nothing, I said. Kyle stared at me. Rachel's mouth tightened. Nothing? Nothing that makes this disappear. The conference room vent clicked above us. Someone on the video screen shifted papers. Kyle's phone vibrated again, but he left it face down this time. I gathered my chronology into one stack. First Atlantic has the records now, I said. Blue Harbor has its lender. You both have counsel. I'm not signing another cleanup document, and I'm not moving money to save a transaction I didn't approve. Kyle pushed back from the table. So that's it? For today? Yes. Rachel gave a short laugh without humor. Mom spent her life keeping this family together. I slid the terminated buyer letter back toward her. Then stop using her name as the signature line. Nobody answered. That was the last conversation we had in the same room for a while. The consequences did not arrive all at once. They came as letters, scheduled calls, revised loan notices, and folders thick enough to make the corners of my desk bow. First Atlantic finished its special review over the next several weeks. Mercer Holdings' outside counsel checked the operating agreement again. Susan Bell traced the related party payments. The company preserved the electronic records from the period Rachel had administered the files. Daniel Price called me when the formal findings were ready. I can send the full report, he said, but I want you to hear the conclusions before you read 200 pages of support. Go ahead. The March 12th transaction lacked valid owner-level approval after the power of attorney was revoked. Your required Class B consent was not obtained. Rachel had acknowledged the revocation before the transaction. The bridge funds benefited both Kyle's project and Rachel's advisory entity. We also cannot treat the March 14th affidavit as contemporaneous ratification. Its document history is inconsistent with that date. I wrote nothing down. For once, I did not need to. Daniel continued. The post-death acknowledgement presented to you would have addressed some of those historical consent defects if you had signed it. You did not. What happens now? Civil recovery, governance action, settlement if the parties agree. Counsel is also evaluating whether any portion of the record should be referred to the appropriate authorities. I am not predicting what anyone outside the trust will do with it. That was enough. I asked Daniel one more question. Does the report say the buyer failed because I raised the dispute? No, he said. The buyer terminated because seller authorization and historical representations could not be relied on. Your notice forced the issue into review, but the underlying defects were already there. I looked through the window above the sink. The maple in the backyard had filled out while I was counting dates. Evelyn used to complain that I noticed fiscal quarters before seasons. Put that sentence in writing, I said. It's already in the report. That mattered because Rachel's last accusation still had teeth. She had said, I cost the family millions. The report did not make the loss pleasant, but it put the cause back where it belonged. On a sale built over records the buyer could not trust. No sirens. No handcuffs at an office door. Just consequences that had to survive paper before they survived anywhere else. First Atlantic used the trust's controlling Class A vote to remove Rachel as chief executive after the required company process. Her $600,000 closing bonus vanished with the dead sale. RM Advisory returned the $250,000 fee under the civil settlement. The rest took longer. Rachel's lawyers negotiated restitution, costs, and the claims tied to her conduct. The settlement allowed documented obligations to be offset against future distributions from her share of Evelyn's trust. One property that had been scheduled to pass to Rachel in kind was sold instead. Part of the proceeds stayed with the trust to satisfy those obligations. She did not lose every dollar Evelyn had left her. She lost the version where inheritance came without a bill attached. Rachel sent me one message during that period. You know I was trying to protect the family. I read it at the kitchen table and forwarded it to my attorney without replying. No apology. No acknowledgement of the false ratification path. No mention of asking me to sign something that said I had reviewed transactions I had never seen. The next communication went through counsel. Her attorney proposed conditions for future contact twice. Both versions started with what Rachel wanted from me and ended without the words I needed to see. Responsibility, repayment, no excuses. I told my attorney not to negotiate a relationship. If Rachel ever wanted one, she could begin by finishing the obligations she had already signed. Kyle handled things differently, though not painlessly. He signed a statement acknowledging that he had questioned the authorization, accepted Rachel's answer because the project needed the money, and kept the $2,400,000 after choosing not to ask Evelyn directly. The bridge advance became recoverable. Blue Harbor could not refinance enough to repay everything while preserving Kyle's control. His lender forced a restructuring. New capital came in, Kyle's ownership was diluted, and he lost the controlling position he had spent years trying to build. He also stepped away from the family board observer role he had treated as automatic. One evening, he called me. They're taking control next month, Kyle said. I heard traffic through his hands-free system and the steady tap of a turn signal. I know. I can stay on in development if I accept the new structure. Are you going to? A long breath came through the speaker. Probably. I don't have many better options. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Kyle said, I kept thinking you'd find a way around it. My fingers rested on Evelyn's watch where it sat beside me. I know. You always did before. I know that too. He did not ask me for money. Before hanging up, Kyle said, I should have called Mom. I waited. Yes, I said. He did not add that Rachel made him do anything. He did not remind me about employees or lenders. The sentence stood by itself. That mattered more than anything else, he said. When the company hired interim management, Daniel asked if I would come back for 3 months to stabilize the books and prepare the portfolio for a future sale. I almost laughed. No, I said. We can structure proper compensation. That's not the problem. The people living in our properties had nothing to do with my children. Neither did the maintenance crews, leasing staff, or vendors who needed clean records. So I agreed to a limited handover instead. 4 weeks. Defined scope, historical accounting questions, lender files, entity maps, and nothing beyond that. I sent an engagement letter before I opened the first binder. For the first time in decades, the Mercer name did not make the work free. At the end of 4 weeks, I handed the interim manager a list of professional contacts and closed my laptop. "We may need you again," he said. "Then call my office and ask if I'm available." Not dad, not founder, not the man who would fix it because he could. A consultant with a calendar and an invoice. My own Class B interest stayed mine through the review. Months later, when the company had independent management and a new valuation, I sold part of it and kept part. No dramatic exit, no revenge price. Just a number supported by an appraisal and a signature I chose to give. Kyle and I began with one phone call every few weeks. Short ones. He told me when a repayment milestone cleared. I did not ask about Rachel. He did not ask me to intervene. Rachel and I did not speak directly. Not yet. The last thing I changed was the watch. The watchmaker in Stamford held it beneath a lamp and turned the cracked crystal toward me. "Movement's fine," he said. "Needs a battery and cleaning. I can replace the crystal too. Can you leave the crack?" He looked at it again. "If you're careful with it. The seal won't be perfect. Leave it." A week later, he placed the watch in my palm. The leather strap had been cleaned but not replaced. The crack still crossed the face. Beneath it, the second hand moved with a soft, steady tick. I fastened it around my wrist. 12:47 came and went. This time, the hands kept moving. What you can take from this story is simple. Love does not require you to sign away your judgment. When money, inheritance, business, and family are mixed together, pressure often arrives disguised as urgency. You may hear, "Just sign it. Don't make this harder. We're family," or "Everyone is counting on you." Those words can make you feel as if asking one more question is an act of betrayal. It is not. If a document affects your money, your legal rights, your property, or your responsibility for someone else's decisions, you are allowed to read every line, ask who prepared it, request the supporting records, and refuse to sign until the facts make sense. You also do not have to accuse someone before you protect yourself. Thomas did not need to start with a dramatic claim. He asked for dates, records, consent documents, and transaction history. That is a useful lesson outside fiction. When something feels wrong in a family financial matter, write down what you know. Separate facts from assumptions. Keep copies of messages and documents you are legally entitled to have, and get qualified professional advice before making a decision you cannot easily reverse. Another lesson is harder, especially for parents. Helping your adult children is not the same as preventing them from experiencing consequences. If you solve every overdue bill, failed deal, bad loan, or poor decision, you may accidentally teach them that your time, money, skills, and reputation will always be available to absorb the damage. A boundary can sound cruel to someone who benefited from the absence of one. That does not make the boundary wrong. You can still care about people without lying for them, hiding what they did, signing something untrue, or sacrificing your own future to keep them comfortable. Accountability is not the opposite of love. Sometimes it is the only way a relationship has any chance of becoming honest again. The story also shows why evidence matters more than volume. A family argument can quickly become a contest over who sounds more convincing. Records do not solve every problem, but dates, contracts, emails, bank entries, and written agreements can keep the truth from being rewritten by whoever speaks first or loudest. If the issue is serious, slow down. Do not destroy records. Do not secretly take things you have no right to access. Do not threaten people into confessing. Protect what you can lawfully preserve and let the facts build in order. And finally, you are allowed to stop being the person who fixes everything. Maybe you have spent years being the dependable one in your family, the person everyone calls when money is short, paperwork is confusing, or somebody has made a mistake. If that sounds familiar, ask yourself one question. Are people coming to you because they respect you, or because they expect you to clean up what they refuse to face? Have you ever been pressured by a relative to sign something, lend money, give up property, or stay silent for the sake of the family? Have you ever realized that helping someone too often had turned into protecting them from responsibility? And if you had been in Thomas's place, would you have signed to keep the peace, or would you have asked for the records first? Share what you think. Someone listening may recognize their own family in your answer.